So I'll ask Julie to put up our slides, and we will have the opportunity to now hear from a number of speaker pairs to discuss their programs and models and the work that they are doing to advance health equity. As a reminder, I'm going to read a very brief bio for each of our speakers in this next session, but I do welcome you to view their full bio in the briefing materials that we sent out to you in advance. Our first set of panelists are Dr. Donald Warren and Ms. Petra Harmon-Wanhawk. Dr. Warren is the Associate Dean of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion, as well as the Director of the Indians into Medicine, or InMed, and Master of Public Health Programs. He's a Professor of Family and Community Medicine at the School of Medicine and Health Sciences at the University of North Dakota. He also serves as the Senior Policy Advisor to the Great Plains Tribal Chairman's Health Board in Rapid City, South Dakota. Dr. Warren is a member of the Ogallala Lakota tribe from Pine Ridge, South Dakota, and comes from a long line of traditional healers and medicine men. He received his MD from Stanford University School of Medicine and his MPH from Harvard School of Public Health. Ms. Petra Harmon-Wanhawk is currently the Title VI Director for the Standing Rock Sioux Tribe, and she is an enrolled member of Standing Rock. Ms. Harmon-Wanhawk has a background in medicine, health, and education. She is also an eminent scholar in Lakota language and culture through Sitting Bull College. In addition to her role as director, she also serves as a cultural competency instructor for her tribe. Her passion is prevention by using foods as medicine. Her primary focus at this moment is working with the tribe in the state of North Dakota's Money Follows the Person Tribal Initiative to help build long-term supportive services for elders in Indian country. She has her bachelor's degree in biology from the University of North Dakota, and she completed 3 years of medical school at the University of South Dakota and has her master's of public health from North Dakota State University. Dr. Warren and Ms. Petra Harmon-Wanhawk, I will turn to you now.
Okay, sounds very good. I really appreciate the discussion so far, and the discussion regarding equity and the need for lived experience when we're talking about best ways to promote equity in our communities. I really appreciate those comments. And as was mentioned, I serve as Associate Dean at the medical school here at University of North Dakota. Just in terms of workforce diversity, just to put this in context, when you look at all of the medical schools in the United States, all of the medical schools, there are 0 deans. We have no American Indian dean of a medical school. And there's only 2 of us who serve as associate deans. There's a handful of assistant deans, but only 2 of us who are at the level of associate dean. My daughter happens to be in 5th grade, and she had a quiz where they did some trivia, and it turns out that there's 3 golf balls on the moon. So now I like to say that there's actually more golf balls on the moon than there are American Indians who serve as associate deans at medical schools. So this is a big problem. It's really an upstream root cause challenge of some of our disparities, is that we do not have adequate representation in higher education, particularly in the medical school workforce and leadership. I also really appreciated the acknowledgement of place and the land acknowledgement that we heard at the very beginning from Ivory. I really appreciate that. At University of North Dakota, we do have a land acknowledgement as well. I won't read through the entire acknowledgement, but it's important to recognize that every bit of the United States is indigenous land. And I think it's incumbent on all of us to really understand that history and to know which tribal groups were located in the areas that we call home now. So this is a map of North Dakota. University of North Dakota is in the northeastern part of the state in Grand Forks, North Dakota. And we have 4 federally recognized tribes that have their headquarters in the state of North Dakota. That's Turtle Mountain Band of Chippewa Indians, the Spirit Lake Nation, which is a Dakota tribe, the Mandan, Hidatsa, and Arikara Nation, or the 3 affiliated tribes. And then where Petra is from, Standing Rock Sioux tribe, which is a Lakota group. We also have a sliver of land from the Sisseton Wahpeton Oyate, another Dakota tribal group, but their headquarters is actually in South Dakota. So what's fascinating, many people don't realize the reason it's called North Dakota is it's named after the tribal groups that were here originally, the Dakota peoples. So myself and Petra are Lakota, which is a sister tribal group within the Oyate, or the people, and the Dakota were further east and the Lakota further west. So the reason it became the Dakota Territory is that colonization came from the east. So they encountered the Dakotas. If it had come from the other direction, I'd be working at the University of North Lakota because they would have encountered the Lakotas first. So I'd be at UNL instead of UND if colonization had come from the other direction. One of the things I'm proud of with my medical school is that we do have a diversity statement. And again, I won't go into the entire detail of it, but I do appreciate that the people served by and associated with the School of Medicine and Health Sciences vary widely. All are valued for the richness of their different cultures, heritages, and perspectives and ideas that they bring to the community. And of special and particular importance is the School of Medicine and Health Sciences' longstanding commitment to the education of American Indian students and the cultures and traditions of American Indians and Alaska Natives. There are very few medical schools that specifically call out the need to educate American Indian students in medicine. And if they talk about it, they're not doing it to the degree that I wish that they were. So we have a lot of challenges when we look at the workforce and diversity and trying to create some equity. So one of our big challenges as American Indians and Alaska Natives is that we are the minority of the minority populations, but we are also the most underrepresented of the underrepresented minority populations. On this map, you can see that the African-American populations are kind of in the orange counties, primarily in the South, then Hispanic populations in green, which are of course also in the South and Southwest, and the light blue represents American Indian populations. There's now only 7 states that have at least 3% American Indian or Alaska Native population. That's Alaska, Montana, North Dakota, South Dakota, Arizona, New Mexico, and Oklahoma. So we have very little representation, and I think that has an impact on equity when we think about even political influence. We don't have very many of us, so we need collaborators, we need partners in advocacy, and we need organizations like medical schools to address this problem in a comprehensive manner. So there are reasons for the limited distribution of our population. Of course, we mentioned that we should all have a land acknowledgement and recognize that every bit of this country is Indian country. This was American Indian population long before there was colonization. And our access to territory and resources was just dramatically reduced over the years, over the centuries. And now we have very little land base in terms of reservations and very few people left. But we are still here. We're a significant population, and we are terribly underrepresented in the physician workforce. If we look at AAMC data, so the Association of American Medical Colleges, we see that American Indians are somewhere around 0.2 to 0.4% of the entire medical school population. And one of our challenges, and Dr. Zhao mentioned it at the beginning, is that also how we collect data can be a challenge because we have people who are, of course, American Indian only, but we also people who are more than one race. So there could be American Indian in combination with other races. So when we look at just the tens of thousands of medical students, there's only a few hundred who are American Indian. So again, somewhere between 0.2 to 0.4% of all medical students are American Indian, depending on how we look at the data. Why is this important? Well, when we look at matriculants into medical school, 41% of the American Indian Alaska Native medical school matriculants plan to work in underserved areas compared to 27% of all medical school matriculants. And upon graduation, this doesn't change very much. It's still 38% of American Indians and Alaska Natives who graduate medical school plan to work in underserved populations as compared to about 24% of all graduates. So we need more of us. We certainly have a terrible shortage in the Indian Health Service and in tribal health programs, and we don't have enough. We don't have enough active physicians. We're about 0.56% of all physicians. And as I had mentioned, very low numbers in faculty, less than half, 1%, as American Indian faculty members at MD granting institutions. So just terrible shortages. So I really appreciate this discussion on equity. And I'm sure many of you have seen this slide or similar images before, looking at the differences between equality and equity. And again, I appreciate the initial discussion about looking at the root causes and kind of going upstream to find out what the root causes of our challenges are. And it's not just about packages of services, it's also about looking at how to look at the outcomes to make sure that everyone has the opportunity to have optimal health. On the left, equality is basically everyone getting the same package of services. That could be, for example, a Medicaid plan, everyone gets the same services. Or it could be a medical school curriculum. Everyone gets the exact same curriculum. And we can see on the left, the half of this image, the guy on the left didn't need it, the one in the middle is being well served, and the guy on the right is still underserved. And through an equity lens, we're trying to not just look at the process and the package of services or the curricula, we're trying to look at outcomes and making sure that everyone can achieve the highest level of health possible. And I'd shown this image for a number of years. And a couple of years ago, someone sent me a slide that I think is just absolutely brilliant. And the question is, what is that fence doing there in the first place? And we could look at equality and equity in terms of packages of services and how do we design services, how do we design curricula to best meet the needs of populations. Or we could also just break down the systemic barrier. And from my perspective, one of the big systemic barriers for American Indian health is just the lack of providers. And that's really the whole point of InMed, the Indians into Medicine program. Through InMed, it's been around since 1973. So the current second year medical students are the class of 2023. That's the 50-year anniversary of InMed. And over the years, we've been very fortunate. We've now graduated over 250 American Indian physicians out of InMed programming. And we are the top producer of American Indian physicians. But other universities should focus on this as well. It should not just be University of North Dakota. We should see much stronger efforts across the nation. But this requires programming. It requires effort. And one of the themes for this session is looking at community engagement and involving the community. One of the things that InMed did at the very beginning is to establish a tribal advisory board. So we have representatives from regional tribes who serve on the advisory board and help guide our programming as well as help recruit potential students. We have a summer institute where we bring middle school and high school students from reservation communities to the UND campus for 6 weeks. And they take STEM courses as well as communications classes, test taking skills. And many of those students in Summer Institute, these are middle school and high school students, eventually go on to medical school or other health professions. We have an MCAT prep program. Quite often our students struggle with standardized exams. So through MCAT prep, that's seniors in college or recent graduates who are trying to improve their MCAT scores. And many of our current medical students are MCAT prep alums as well. We have an MD cohort. So we have anywhere from 6 to 8 medical students per year who are enrolled tribal members who are part of the medical school. That's how we're able to get our numbers up. And over the last year or two, we've established now Indigenous Health Master Public Health Specialization, as well as a new Indigenous Health PhD. In terms of the Indigenous Health MPH, of course, they take the usual public health courses, but also courses related to principles of Indigenous health, social and ecological determinants of Indigenous health, American Indian Health Policy, which is a course that I teach, and public health programming in Indigenous populations. So we now have about a dozen American Indian students in this Indigenous Health MPH. One of my former students is Petra Harmon-Wunhawk, and she'll be speaking to us in just a little bit. I'm very proud of our new Indigenous Health PhD. We were hoping that we would have in our first cohort this year about 12 students. It turned out we had over 50 applications, and we admitted 19 students. And of those 19, 17 are American Indian. So when we combine the 8 first-year medical students and the 17 first-year PhD students at our little University of North Dakota School of Medicine and Health Sciences, we have 25 first-year American Indian doctoral students. And again, this is something that other universities could do and should do. Of course, we designed this so people can stay in their home community. So it's designed on the front end to be done through Zoom. So having distance technologies turned out to be a blessing in disguise because we've all had to go to this format because of the pandemic. But this is a picture of quite a few of our PhD students from all over the country and Canada who are now PhD students in Indigenous health. I'm also very proud of our faculty. I think one of the best ways to recruit American Indian students is to have American Indian faculty. We also have Dr. Siobhan Westcott, who is at the Baskin from Alaska, Dr. Melanie Nadu, who is Ojibwe from the Turtle Mountain community, Nicole Redvers, who is Dene First Nations from Canada, and Dr. Ursula Runningbear, who is from Rosebud, South Dakota. So I'll go ahead and hand it at this point over to Petra to describe her programming and linkages to public health. So Petra, I'll hand it off to you.
Good afternoon. Little bit under the weather, but still going to just share a little bit. I really appreciate Dr. Warren sharing the opportunities that he has created. And I think it's so important and needed in Indian country because we have such a tie to our communities. And I speak from experience. I was a summer institute student from 7th grade to my 10th grade year. So every summer I went to UND and spent my summers there. And it's actually where I had met my husband, and we were friends throughout our life and then married later on. I went on to finish my bachelor's of biology there and was able to receive assistance from the InMed program during that time and really felt supported by the Indian programming that was there. And then I went on to medical school. And one of the things about, I went to University of South Dakota, and one thing that I learned about was the importance of these programs. And I just know from other students who were in medical school at the time that there was this this notion and that they were only allowed in because of affirmative action and that they didn't really deserve to be in medical school, and they were treated as such when they were doing their clinicals. And so I had this notion that I wanted to apply through the regular pool so that I could show everybody that I deserved to be there and I earned my way and that I didn't just come through the Indian program. Well, the importance of those programs is really having those supports. And so I had to learn that the hard way. I went through the general pool. And then when I experienced discrimination in medical school, when I went to the InMed director at that time, they said that they couldn't help me because I wasn't one of their InMed students. And so I was just really left out to deal with the discrimination at that time by myself. So needless to say, I didn't finish medical school and I returned home, and I had a wake-up call that really there was limited access to healthy foods. And then I met Dr. Warren when I was recruited by one of our council members to work on a health plan, and I met Dr. Warren, and it took Dr. Warren and some of the other doctors to convince me. It took me 2 years to be convinced to go back and get my MPH, just because it's so hard when you come back into your community. It's so hard to establish that trust. And so leaving it, I know that how hard it is to get back into the community. And I graduated in 2016 and I still haven't been able to move home. So I commute 60 miles, 120 miles round trip to come to work here. But it's my passion, my love for my people. And then I just also wanted to share real quick about the the NODAPL, the Dakota Access Pipeline, the protests that were happening, and it really represents who we are as a people. And you know, we often end our prayers, we say Mudakue Oyasi, which means we are all related. And that speaks not just for all humans, but all of creation, that we have a responsibility to all of creation because it provides everything for us to be able to live: fresh air, clean water, having access to land, having that healthy food. And it really hits on that, you know, the social determinants of health, that we're not able to be healthy and whole if our environment is not healthy and whole. And so I just want to share with that. And I'm really grateful for the opportunity that Dr. Warren has provided for me to be able to find a way in this, in my journey, and to reestablish my career, and to be able to use the 3 years of medical school in helping my people, even though I don't have that MD, and really giving me the tools and the language to an understanding of what public health is. And it really was healing for me, and it gave me some it was really beneficial for me to be able to help my people in a better way, in a more concrete way. So thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Warren and Mrs. Harmon One-Hawk. Did you want to round up the conversation, Dr. Warren? I apologize if I'm cutting you off.
Oh, no, not at all. Just wanted to thank you very much for the opportunity to address this important group, and I really appreciate being included in the discussion. So thank you very much.
Thank you for bringing attention to the need for representation and culturally responsive care as well via the InMed program. I'm delighted to turn now to our next model. We have Ms. Anaya Patterson, who is the board chair and teen executive committee chair for the warehouse. In her role, she facilitates the board chair meetings and engages with the teen executive committee to make decisions on behalf of the warehouse. Anaya is also actively involved in AVID, which is Advancement via Individual Determination at Delaware Futures, a college readiness program. Ms. Patterson is a senior at Mount Pleasant High School and will be pursuing her college dreams in the fall. She was recently accepted to more than 5 colleges and is still actively applying for additional ones, as well as she has received more than $175,000 in scholarships. Ms. Patterson is joined by Representative Sherry Dorsey Walker, who is the first person of color elected to the Delaware House of Representatives from the 3rd District in 2018. She was also the first woman and the first person of color elected to the 6th District of the Wilmington City Council in 2012. As a city councilwoman, Ms. Dorsey Walker works tirelessly to foster relationships among businesses, governmental agencies, and schools. She advocates for educators, children, and their families in the school and local communities. Moreover, Representative Dorsey Walker literally walks the streets of her districts in an effort to identify constituents who desire to work and to assist them with becoming gainfully employed. She humbly believes that her purpose in life is to educate, entertain, and enlighten through her films and her public service. She earned a master's in film from Howard University and a bachelor's of arts from the University of Delaware in English journalism. Ms. Patterson and Representative Dorsey Walker, I will turn to you both.
Thank you very much for the opportunity. It is indeed a pleasure and an honor to be here. I would like to see if Ms. Patterson would like to start first, because I think you should always have beauty before wisdom.
I just want to make sure, can everyone hear me fine?
Yes.
Yes, ma'am.
Yes? Okay, good. Okay. So I'm going to put my presentation up. Oh, sorry. Hold on. Okay. So, as mentioned, I am Anaya Patterson. I'm 17 years old and a senior at Mount Pleasant High School. And today I will be giving you a short presentation on the warehouse, what we do, what we offer, and basically how they sort of kind of change my life. So yeah. So the warehouse is a community center. We're located on the northeast side of Wilmington, Delaware, and we serve teenagers aging 13 to 19. One thing we follow at the warehouse is REACH. That's an acronym we follow. It stands for Recreation, Education, Arts, Career, and Health. That's Recreation, Education, Arts, Career, and Health. And everything in the warehouse falls under those pillars. All of the programming we offer to teenagers falls under those pillars. All of our partners and their organizations fall under those pillars. You know, everything at the warehouse is REACH. We're currently running the WAVE program, which stands for Warehouse Advanced Virtual Experience. And that is our virtual programming that we run from Monday to Thursday every week. And It actually came about because of COVID. We were set to open April of this year, and then COVID hit a few weeks prior. So we never got to really open, but the WAVE program allows for us to still offer programming to team members of the warehouse and, you know, still keep them looped in as much as we can. This is like our mantra at the warehouse. It is what we live by, and that is for teams by teams. Everything in the warehouse goes through a team first. It's basically why I'm here giving you this presentation right now, why I sit as the board chair, and why a lot of the things at the warehouse happen the way they happen. Teams are very influential in decision making and, you know, helping the warehouse run. I've sat in on meetings with like interior designers and the architects. Literally, like back in 2019, the architects came to us and said, "What do you guys want?" And we told them. And so the warehouse, they take pride in allowing teams to use their voice and make decisions, because that's not a lot you see in traditional, you know, like community centers and things of that sort. Another thing that falls under 4 teams by teams is the team executive committee. So we have 4 teams who have been at the warehouse since 2018, a part of the team executive committee. I sit as the president. We have 2 vice presidents, Zora Waswell and Jameer Hargrave, and we also have a secretary, and her name is Ariane Driver. So basically the responsibility of the team executive committee is if there's anything the team members or team employees at the warehouse need, we are the people they come to. If they want to see something that we don't already have, if they want a random event, anything really that any team at the warehouse wants, they come to us. We meet with them and with each other. We basically come up with a game plan and execute it. Me being the board chair, if it's on a more serious note and I need to take it to the board and we need to discuss it, I can do that. But we are just like the working force that represents the teams of the warehouse, if that makes sense. Another thing that we're huge on at the warehouse is events. We have been throwing events since 2018. We even threw some events this year. You know, we didn't have as many as we wanted to due to COVID, but we still were able to make some things happen. So these flyers, you can't really see them, but I'll just explain them to you. We had a candidate forum earlier this year. So we had both state and local government officials. They came to the warehouse. We asked them a bunch of questions and we had a conversation. It was super nice, very informative. I learned a lot of stuff I didn't know. You know, I just love politics, so it was very interesting being able to see, you know, who represents me in my district or my state, because I personally feel as though, like, you know, that's more important than, like, the president and stuff like that, because, you know, they're the people that's closest to you. So that really allowed us to get insight on who's representing us and stuff like that. We had another event. It was a school supply drive, so we handed out school supplies to the community. We had food. We gave tours of the warehouse. We allowed teenagers to sign up for membership. We had some of like our partner organizations there handing out like flyers and things of that sort. So although we are a teen center, we do a lot of events, you know, for the community as a whole. So adults and children and, you know, everybody in between. We also have something that we host every Wednesday, which is Warehouse Wednesdays. So if anyone wants to learn about the warehouse, doesn't know, wants to sign up for membership, you know, we give them a tour. We give them a rundown of the warehouse, what we do, and all that fun stuff. And then, you know, we allow them to sign up for membership at the end. So that's the warehouse very quickly. But now I just want to get into, you know, me a little more personally and life as board chair. So I do sit as the board chair of the warehouse. I was appointed that position May of this year. So I'm fairly fresh, but this is a position I am extremely grateful for. Back in May, when it was approached to us, I was terrified. I was the only teen out of everybody to want the position, and I was terrified. Like, I was so scared, just because it's something new. Like, thinking about me and the type of person I am, like learning what Robert's Rules of Order was, and can I get a second, and just all this stuff. And then like I hadn't really met none of my board members previously. I knew a few of them, so it was really scary just to all like hit me at once, like, oh, you got to be board chair, you got to do this, you got to do this. And then at the warehouse, you know, I have to uphold that standard. And so yeah, it was really scary, but it's an opportunity that I'm so grateful for. The warehouse is just great. Like, I don't know, like the warehouse has helped me in so many more ways than one. Back in 2018, I would not be able to do this right here. Like, even though it feels like I'm talking to myself because I'm talking to a screen, seeing that it's over 100 people in here, I would be going crazy. But the warehouse has given me the tools, and they really helped build my confidence in order for me to, you know, be able to do things like this. That's one thing specifically, board chair, being in that position has helped me, was definitely my confidence. Because people have always told me, oh, you're a great leader, or oh, you're very articulate, you can speak well, this, that, and the third. But it's like, if you don't feel that way, it's, the words only mean but so much. And so being in the position of board chair and just interacting with the different people I've interacted with, and being able to lead how I lead has really helped me see, like, oh, you really are a great leader. Like, you can really speak. You really are going to do great things. And the warehouse is just great in doing that, instilling in teams that, you know, like, you can be great. You can do anything you want to do, like, if you put your mind to it, and they will give you the tools and anything, resources and anything you need to be able to, you know, do that. So me personally, I'm extremely grateful for the warehouse and everything that we do. And this is just a little collage I made of, you know, some of my coworkers and stuff like that. There's me and Joe Biden. I met Joe Biden at the warehouse. So that just shows, like, the warehouse brings many, 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 many opportunities to your life. And so, yeah, I'm very thankful for them. And I can't wait to impact other teams how the warehouse has impacted me. And that concludes. Hope you guys enjoyed.
And now you see why it's important to have her go first. Anaya is indeed the future president of the United States of America, and I'm just excited to be able to serve alongside her. Anaya, that was a phenomenal presentation, and you are, in fact, an outstanding leader, and I'm grateful to have this opportunity to co-chair with you. Anaya hit on all of the most important parts of the teen warehouse, because that's what she does. She knows the warehouse inside and out, and I actually am learning from Anaya, and I thank her for teaching me so much. The beauty of the warehouse and Reach Riverside and the leadership that we have is, it's unmatched. And I say that because, as I heard conversations a little earlier about equity and equality, our young people have an understanding of what that means and how we move forward. And the other part of it is, you heard Anaya talk about basically legislation. And if you listen very closely, she was talking about how to shift the culture. And so I honestly can say I want to be like Anaya when I grow up. But I look at this and I say, we have a piece of legislation that will be forthcoming, same-day voter registration. And that's birthed from our young people, because we had Anaya sponsored, along with the leaders at the warehouse, the teen warehouse. They hosted legislators, and they asked about, why do we have deadlines for registering to vote? Why can't people just go in and vote? And in hearing what Anaya had to say, and then listening to the other young people, I shall be sponsoring House Bill 25, which is same-day voter registration. So it's so important that our young people have not only a seat at the table, but they have a voice, and that we listen to them as they speak, because we can learn from them. And we have to have a willingness to learn from them. I am in awe of each and every young person at the teen warehouse, because they bring so much first off, they exhibit courage. And to know that Anaya is overseeing a budget of millions of dollars as we are embarking upon rebuilding the northeast side of Wilmington, Delaware. And to know that she's sitting there right at the table helping to make the decisions, that's so important, because my word tells me, and a child will lead them. And as you clearly heard, we're in good hands with this leadership, with Anaya Patterson. So I'm excited about the opportunities that are presented through Reach Riverside, the Teen Warehouse, and just being able to hear the voices of our young people and making sure that their voices aren't silent. I remember when being a young person growing up in the city of Wilmington and going to civic association meetings with my father and knocking doors to get people elected at 8 and then going to civic association meetings at 12. I just remember the lessons that my parents taught me to not judge people and use your voice to be a blessing to others. And as I listen to Anaya and listen to the other teens at the Teen Warehouse, I'm grateful that I listened to my parents in this moment and that we have this opportunity to work together to bring about change in our community. So I don't want to belabor the conversation. If there are any questions for Anaya or myself, we'll gladly answer them.
Thank you both. We do thank you for mentioning the questions, Representative Dorsey Walker. We are certainly looking forward to having folks add those to the Q&A function, and we'll be engaging in a question and answer at the conclusion of each of our presentations. So thank you again to both of you for sharing more about the warehouse, and more importantly, or most importantly, the role and ways that power sharing is occurring to engage and elevate the leadership potential of youth. As was stated yesterday, these are not the leaders of the next generation. These are the leaders of now. And Ms. Patterson, you are one of those leaders now, as are your colleagues at the warehouse. And Representative Walker, we applaud you in being able to demonstrate how this model works to share that power so that we are able to truly at the table for our young leaders to emerge and help guide and shape the way we move forward. So thank you both. I'll now turn to Ms. Brianna Carmen and Ms. Dulce Rojas. Ms. Carmen is the Director of Organizing and Partnerships for Voto Latino Foundation. She is one of the youngest Latinas in the nation to manage a successful U.S. congressional race at the age of 21. Her current work at Voto Latino Foundation focuses on managing the campaigns team. She's tasked with building up the organization's volunteer network all over the country. She has maintained her passion of connecting voters with opportunities to exercise their voice at Voto Latino. And she's also a leader in Voto Latinos Foundation's voter registration programs, working to engage grassroots, corporate, union, and celebrity partners to support efforts to register 500,000 people and turn out 1 million voters for the 2020 general election. Ms. Dulce Rojas is a campaigns coordinator working to connect organizations and volunteers around the country in national civic engagement activities. She became the first senior community organizer for Cepa Mujer, a grassroots organization that organizes Latino immigrant women and families. She's led immigrant-led protests and campaigns fighting to restore driver's license access, fair wages, violence against women, and immigrants' rights. Ms. Rojas has also worked on unique curricula to empower rural immigrant women and girls to lead grassroots campaigns, legislative advocacy, and local activism. She has and continues to serve on a variety of state and regional coalitions, steering committees, and conferences, and has been the recipient of many prestigious awards in honor of her work. Ms. Rojas obtained a bachelor's degree in communications in Spanish from St. Joseph's College of New York. Ms. Carmen and Ms. Rojas, I'll turn to you to share more about Voto Latino Foundation.
Hi, everyone. Again, my name is Brianna Carmen, and it's such a huge honor to be here along with my colleague, Dulce Rojas, and all of these amazing panelists presenting at the National Academy of Medicine's event today. I think, as I've been sitting here listening to the presentation, there's just so many recurring themes of civic engagement, how voting is important, how investing in our young leaders is important, how representation for and by the communities that we serve is incredibly important to making sure that we have a seat at the table, that we're having these conversations about access, equity, and equality. And when we were approached by NOM, one issue that came up that we really wanted to discuss that we felt was so key to this conversation today was the census, how it is going to be the determinant for the next 10 years of funding, federal funding that gets sent to state, local, and other municipalities to help direct some of these services and programs that some of you might be working in or be the recipients or some way connected to. So I'll go ahead and share our presentation screen, and we'll go ahead and get started just with this presentation, more so as a post-mortem of the census. As you all know, it wrapped up this last quarter, this past year, and it was a whirlwind to be running a national program around the census with just so many things and the magnitude sharing that with our community. So let me know if you can see my screen. I'll be looking for some head nods.
Yes, we can see it. I'll give you the verbal cue as well.
Perfect. And Dulce, I'll turn it over to you to introduce yourself as well.
Hi, everyone. My name is Dulce, as mentioned. Thank you so much for that readout of the bio. I think that whenever I like to speak about myself and the work that I've done is, just never forget that this is people-to-people work. This is humans caring about other humans and, really making sure that we're listening to each other, caring for each other. So I'll be bringing in a little bit more of the grassroots perspective and a little bit about some of the work that I've learned, learning from and working with and growing with our community, mostly based in New York. That is where my grassroots organizing was born and most experience is. So I'll be speaking to that a little bit and a little bit about the work that we've been doing at Voto Latino. And thank you so much for the invitation again.
Perfect. So I gave you all a heads up. We're talking about the census today. So we'd just love to start it off with a quick overview of why the census is important. I know this is something that you all know, but just to help ground this conversation, leaning into how Voto Latino ran a national program around census engagement and kind of us figuring out where we fit in this whole ecosystem of engaging people at the ground from the space where we sit and being able to have access to technology and tools and education, and really trying to be thoughtful of how resources flow to people on the ground and information flows back to us, and it creates a more informed circle and network of people working on this. And last, we'll just open it up for some critical questions and analysis. As a postmortem, there's always room for us to be thoughtful and critical and just think through how we can continue to serve these communities and be thoughtful, notice what might have not worked so well this time, and hopefully in the next 10 years when someone is running this program, how we can continue having conversations and making sure that people are well represented, because the census is so important. So I'm sure most folks either got something in the mail this year, phone calls, had people on their social media talking about it, but the US Census is required every decade. It's mandated in the US Constitution. It informs the allocation of $800+ billion annually in federal assistance to states, localities, and families. So we're talking about programs like Medicaid, Section 8 housing, WIC, and childcare. Very important programs that if we want to discuss healthcare, we need to address what type of funding and resources go to these programs, and if they're in an equitable way that is representative of everyone. So again, this funding impacts schools, impacts housing, healthcare, services, business investment, and much, much more. The census was available by phone, by mail, and for the first time online, as well as in-person enumeration and follow-up, which was really shifted by the coronavirus pandemic. The timeline was March 20th through October 15th. 2020, that timeline also shifted about 4 or 5 times. So that's something that we'd love to discuss and take any questions on how that shifting timeline eroded confidence in the system, in this process, and in people's ability to take the census and be aware of the deadlines. Dulce?
Yes. So just to share a little bit more about the work that we were leading at Voto Latino. Definitely it was a challenge working on a program that really is based on the volunteer power, grassroots power to reach the hard to count communities, right? So here's a little bit about the work that we did in September 2018. We launched the Somos Mas coalition, and really the goal of it was to, really try to get as much as we can from partners from across the country, really get to them the tools that they need to really mobilize and to continue to organize with COVID happening. Later on in the presentation, we're going to talk about other challenges that we faced. But before COVID hit, we were able to do as an organization lots of in-person events, public libraries, college campuses, really trying to go into the community instead of the community coming to us, right? And this was, grassroots 101, really held some amazing events. So can you go to the next slide? Awesome. Yeah, so then during COVID, we really had to shift gears. And one of the things that we started to focus on is how can we get volunteers talking to volunteers and really driving that grassroots power. Again, really trying to make sure that we're listening to the community, that we are acknowledging the issues, trying to be as supportive as we can, really, trying to make sure that we have people helping people. So we did lots of peer-to-peer text banking, which if you're not familiar with that, it's basically people texting people. And we did that across the country in our key states. I believe we sent out 6.8 million texts at the end of the entire peer-to-peer texting program, mobilizing 7,000 volunteers. So it was really, an effort for the organization to say, how can we shift gears so that we are still putting our communities front and center, which we'll talk about later on as well. We did a virtual webinar. We also did some amazing social media content, which we'll share later on. I would encourage, if anybody's interested in looking into some of this content and seeing what really hit the nail on the head in our communities that really made a buzz, make sure to follow us as well so that you can get access to those. Next slide. Did you want to take it from here, Brianna, or did you want me to keep going?
Sure, I can recap our highlights. As far as the census program, again, Dulce did an amazing job running it. We worked with 75 partners all across the board, some from the local level all the way up to the national partner entities like Univision, Apala, Monterey County Complete Count Committee, Telemundo, Siren, The No. So that was part of our strategy, is as a national entity, really reaching out and building partnerships at the local, state, and up level. So that way we are having conversations, being thoughtful of how we're sharing resources, and also not duplicating the work. So that way we were able to, help ideally where we could help and let local communities take the lead on that. We were able to gather 20,587 pledges through this program, which again, super proud of Dulce. The equivalent, if we're using, each person for about $10,000 of funding for the community, that's about $205 million for hard to count Latinx communities estimated in federal aid that should be decided in this coming year. So it's really exciting, really incredible work. As Dulce mentioned, our overall texting program, we sent out 6.8 million texts. A little bit under 300,000 of those were just on the census. So empowering our volunteers to have in-person or over-the-phone conversations with people who were from a similar network, similar age, similar demographics, and just check in and see, did you take the census? Did you have any questions? That's awesome, you took it. Is there someone that comes to mind who you can send a reminder to right now? That was part of our strategy, as well as really amplifying social media engagement and content, using social media to educate our audience, shaping the messaging because coronavirus really hit March, right before the April 1st Census Day and kickoff. So that shifted our messaging to be, stay home, take the census, and really focus on content like that. Wash your hands, make sure you're taking the census. And we can go ahead and share that out if you all are interested in those learnings as well.
Awesome. So just to recap, we're going to focus on census as a tool for change, and how this was important, relevant for not just Latinx, but also Black, Indigenous, people of color communities. Again, this is census already ended, for those that are not familiar, but it has made a significant, definitely mark in our communities, seeing how, with the, not just the technological challenges that, this year we faced with COVID-19, but also in general, how our communities have been really, I think the name says it, hard to reach, and how can we do better? So I'll be talking a little bit about that, other systemic barriers, understanding those community challenges, how can we define impact, and how Voto Latino did it, and the strategies we used. Next slide. Great. So I think one of the biggest challenges that we've seen from many groups, institutions, foundations is trying to really attempt to determine the impact and success of communities, and and how do you define that in data, right? So I think for a grassroots organizer myself, I think I've always tried to say we need to really put qualitative data over quantitative data. And how can we do that? And is, really focusing on how can the community itself shift the perspective of, making sure that we are staying true to true impact, we're shifting the conversation, we're changing narratives. This is how we define impact. And that's really difficult when you're trying to do a report on numbers, which we tried to do earlier, right? But one of the things that we need to make sure that we keep front and center is that we need to start shifting how we address the community, and how we're listening to the community. This is something very key, and even, how we also shift the perspective and pitching to funders and institutions. The community needs to be the driver in how organizations are leading and, administrating budgets, as we saw with the warehouse, right? And amazing also, just to go back, if Anya's still on the meeting, I think everything that I'm going to talk about here, she's just embodying. So it's just really amazing to see how, where these shifts are happening in different parts of the country, and we need to uplift those and continue to uplift them. So how can you continue to listen to the community and make sure that you're pulling qualitative measurements? You have to see the shift in society, in culture, and we see that with different fragments of conversations about talking about the census. When we start to see our tios, our tias, our uncles and aunties talking about the census in their everyday conversations, when you start to follow community trends, when you start to see a shift in how the community start to advocate and self-advocate for each other and for one another, in a shift in interest in being active and what is activism and civically engaged. This is how it's going to lead to long-term impact, and it's also going to be really relevant and how pieces of legislation get addressed, both from local to national, etc. One of the key examples, not just with census, but with another key piece of legislation that we worked on in New York with the driver's license, for example, is that we had a group of community leaders really be the ones to lead the coalition on a statewide level. You know, the same thing with Census, you know, at Voto Latino, is how can we make sure that our volunteer power, the people that make Voto Latino run, are the ones in front lines speaking to the community. So again, these are some national challenges that are always going to be fun. You know, biggest issue is always going to be funding for many organizations, yeah, that are especially grassroots, to measure the success and being responsible and reporting back to funders. But we really need to make sure that we are sticking to our priorities and making sure that whatever the campaign, the issues that we're focusing on, that we are listening attentively and making sure that we are making sure that we're seeing those shifts and trends in the community. I think that is the biggest indicator that we are making success, we're making strides, we're making impact. Next slide, please. Great. So we really need to understand these community priorities first. You know, it's not just enough to listen, but we also need to be actively pinpointing what and where can we address the community in the issues that we need to make sure that we need to start addressing in policy, in funding, in advocacy, and activism. So oftentimes many communities are not only disenfranchised by the systems, but also by the very entities that try to serve and represent them. So the issue roots from not just enough proper engagement and communications, but we also need to start, really dismantling where the root of all of this is coming from. So just to give you all a perspective, at Voto Latino, we tried to use, obviously, lots of our digital tools that we already talked about, but also realizing that there are many communities that had challenges with technology, with I've known lots of communities out here in the rural areas that don't even have signal for texting, for calling. So this is a little bit about what we did here. Can you go to the next slide? Okay, so let's talk about those challenges, and especially when it came to census. So in order to overcome the barriers that our communities faced for meaningful change, again, I already talked about this in the last slide, but we need to unpack these roots. Where is it all coming from? And in order to do that, we're going to be there and able to properly arm our communities. I think Anya mentioned, earlier with the warehouse as well, right? That they're the ones that, whenever a decision has to come with around budgeting or needs for community for the teens in the warehouse, they're the ones that they're getting informed, and then they get to be the decision makers, which is the same thing that we had to do with census. It wasn't just enough to say, okay, here's all the information we're posting, here's an event to talk about it, but how can we provide the resources and the tools, the toolkits, the guides, to really say, here's how you can also continue to organize, and to continue to also just dismantle barriers of misinformation, access, and to not be afraid of the unknown, which is really where it stemmed from. In our community, specifically the Latinx community, we saw a lot of issues, not just in language accessibility, which is a huge issue, but it's also making sure that the messaging and stays relevant to the community we're speaking to, even inside the Latinx community, right? I think that with this election, we've seen a lot of Latinx are not a monolith. So how can we not just translate material, but making sure that we are addressing the issues in the messaging that will not only help to educate, but also mobilize. We need more people like Anya. We need more people like all the advocates here on the call. And the only way to do that is to agitate, mobilize, and organize. And having my grassroots hat on has always been a blessing for me, because it helps me keep the community that I want to serve front and center with everything I do. So learning to speak to the community, not at, is so essential. So definitely if your organization or entity group is really unpacking language accessibility at this moment or have been, always making sure that, you know, just not just translating material, but you're also recognizing the group that you're talking to, and you're making sure that the messaging stays intact. You know, how we're going to mobilize a Mexican community in New York is going to be so different from the Mexican community in California, perhaps, right? So that is so key to overcoming barriers, not just for census, but for any other issues that we will need to overcome and look at and have our communities itself overcome. So we have to come to this realization also that our communities are very heavily targeted for disinformation. And purposely, as we saw with the suppression of this electorate, as we observed in these 2020 elections, right? So we need to recognize this in our communities. And again, you know, how do we arm our communities with this information? So again, I think it's so hard to really just get through the message that we really need to start to speak to our community. So when it came to census, we saw the barriers, with the citizenship question. It was the latest attempt for the administration to undermine and shut out our communities. You know, we saw a big gap in how we're trying to communicate effectively to a large demographic that is diverse within itself on a national level. So this, this fear in the community, which has already, been there for the last few years, if not longer, not only gets, another barrier, gets hit with another fear tactic, which is the citizenship question, or how they're trying to exclude our communities from the census. So again, how do we arm our communities, our our local neighbors into making sure that they're having the information that they need to not just take the census again, but also to mobilize and to advocate. Advocate is, this is where we want to go. Just to share a little bit more, the census really made a huge how would I say, dent in New York. Especially, we had a case study out here. There was a school that in Wyandanch specifically that was severely underfunded and, rooted from many other different issues administratively. But the community also realized, when looking back at census data, it had not received adequate funding because of the huge undercount in young children of color and immigrants. This is, how we can allocate funding the correct way to our communities that need it. Census 101, we need to make sure that everybody's getting counted. So again, I think this is a learning curve for not just many organizations, but for nationally, the census. How can we make sure that this does not happen this time around or next time around in the next 10 years when census gets done again? We can't afford to have our immigrant children not having proper resources to learn, to strive, to be healthy, to have a great community. This district was needed at least $3.7 million more. And again, it just goes to show that, we can't just, rely on technology to just save the day on everything, but we also need to make sure that we're approaching messaging so that it really reaches home for a lot of people. Some other challenges that we face with census was the lack of accessibility for internet. So this is why our partners were so essential, and really building partnerships that are meaningful and long lasting is also key. Really making sure that we have Greenfield Walking Group, which is a small group of, active teens in California, in a very rural community. They were key in making sure that we were mobilizing our folks into text banking, into making sure that our resources were getting to, and toolkits were getting to other advocates and local leaders. They were also key in helping sure that we were getting our media toolkits to local media, which is also really important. They're the ones that our local communities are going to listen to for really important, information when it comes to the census or other things going on in their community. Again, familiarity with the use and execution of census. We tend to forget that, not everybody's going to understand, what the census is, and, seeing the history that we've had with immigrant, ICE tactics, fear tactics, the census was just another thing for our communities that they not just had to, understand and see how it works and really trust the system, it was another barrier. Again, we really need to understand these issues from the perspective of our community. And definitely, another fear and misinformation issue that we encountered was by word of mouth. Our communities are resilient and they're powerful, but they also, have found that we to lean and learn on lean on each other. So word of mouth of fear of of misinformation on the census and how it works and who's coming to knock on our doors was such a huge issue. On top of the systemic challenges and including shifting deadlines and operations and finding the information in their language, it definitely made it more difficult to ensure full participation, to ensure that the funding is getting allocated properly to our communities for these next 10 years. Again, if you weren't familiar, the census deadline shifted about 5 times, along with other challenges and lawsuits, right? As well as, the dates for, last dates for the enumeration and report back. So, again, the more we learn to understand, listen, and unpack where the roots of our, different barriers and different types of oppression are coming from, the more we're able to power up our community to really take the wheel and be the person at the stakeholder table, like we saw with Anya, right? Next slide.
And I think Dulce gave a really great recap of why the census programming, why in and of itself it's incredibly important, engaging with partners and being thoughtful of the way all of this is being carried out. It was an incredibly challenging year, but we realized that having accessible resources and content for partners, volunteers in the community, the items that are in people's languages that make sense to them, that aren't just direct translations, materials that can be easily implemented by others, we saw, and it was eye-opening for myself to realize that having a graphic designer on staff or on payroll is just something that might not be realistic for some smaller nonprofits or organizations who would really benefit from having great content to be able to share out with people, flyers, materials, information and infographics, just to make sure that their point is getting across in multiple languages. We also saw that relevant online messaging and simple calls to action, videos that were funny, were eye-catching, that just made sense and really drilled down why the census is important, how it connects directly towards you, and giving a simple call to action as well as the resources and the tools. This is the website to go take. This is a hotline number if you run into any funny business. This is where you can call if you don't have internet or someone might come knocking to your house. Don't be afraid. This is what that process should look like, and this is when it should start. This is the timeline. Being able to share that information, I think, arms people to be more prepared to take part in that cultural or that social shift of going from someone who might not trust or might not understand or is uninterested in taking the census to an active participant that is really building power for their community and gaining those resources to make sure that they are able to, again, have a seat at the table. As far as next steps in the census, this whole presentation was more so a postmortem We really are seeing that sustained organizing of communities is incredibly important. We need to encourage and develop leadership at the local level, where these individuals who grow up in communities are leading initiatives, whether it's for the census or whether it's about allocation of resources. They're part of the conversations from the get-go and have more of a say in program design. And I think that's definitely an area where Voto Latino ourselves could have been more thoughtful and been more inclusive. As far as census, when resources get allocated, here's our plea for you all to please join community meetings, whether that's school board, city council, other meetings where this funding will be disseminated, discussed. It's important to have your voice there as someone who's advocating for your community, whether your school needs more funding, whether or not your hospital is shutting down, whether or not you need training. These are federal dollars that come to our communities, and we want to make sure that we're not cutting our communities short from the help that they need. And the last ask and a next step from the census is being able to lobby state legislatures to use the data appropriately when redistricting, not gerrymandering or drawing salamander districts, but actually being thoughtful of how many people live in that district, what accurate representation looks like, and that just goes full circle for the next 10 years when we're able to take the census again. So a huge thank you for you all listening to our presentation. We're always happy to share more about the census. We wanted to highlight it here, especially as this whole process came to a close, of just how challenging, given the barriers that already exist, plus working in a pandemic year, plus an administration that, you know, unfortunately just came off as unable to manage this process or build public confidence and trust in something that should not be political. It's going to be a challenge, and right now we're just in a waiting game to see what the results are of the census and making sure that, you know, how that information is used, being thoughtful that it's not going to be a full and accurate representation, and it really is up to us to make sure that we're advocating for the resources that our community needs, so that way we're not suffering or lacking for the next 10 years. Dulce, any closing thoughts?
No, not at all. Thank you again for the invitation. I saw a note there about public charge rule. I think we can go on and on about all the other barriers and challenges that we're facing as, you know, as a whole, as a nation. But, you know, definitely thank you again for the invitation. And I'd love to connect offline with anybody that, you know, wants to continue to see how we can work together as partners, as volunteers, as thoughtful, you know, co-workers, whatever it is. Thank you again.
Thank you, Ms. Rojas and Ms. Carmen, for sharing such an important example of a way that we can engage and support communities and the recognition of the power they have, and to think critically about how we best offer supports to communities.